this week where we were talking about baptism, and that really it has its roots in Jewish in a Jewish mikveh, which is an immersion bath. And I actually did a little more research on that, and I'm going to have to amend that it was actually being used probably a little more than we sometimes know that it was. So I actually went to a site called My Jewish Life, and here's what the rabbi explains. And I thought, given what we were talking about with baptism in the waters of Mormon, I need you to see if some of this resonates. It's a little bit long, but a major function of immersion in a mikveh is conversion to Judaism. The sages declare that a Gentile who wishes to become a Jew must undergo, listen closely, the identical process by which Jewish ancestors converted, using a mikveh, and in mikvahot. As Jews performed immersion at Mount Sinai, to complete the conversion process they'd begun with circumcision, they left Egypt, so converts in every age must immerse in the mikveh. Submerging in a pool of water for the purpose of not only... Now, as he explains Jewish converts using a mikveh to convert to Judaism, think about our understanding of the baptismal process. Both the water, the sign, and the spirit, the cleansing. Okay? Listen to what he says. Submerging in a pool of water for the purpose of not using the water's physical cleansing properties, but expressly to symbolize a change of soul, is a statement at once deeply spiritual and immensely compelling. No other symbolic act can totally embrace a person as being submerged in water, which much touch and cover every legion, every strand of hair, every birthmark. No other religious act is so freighted with meaning as this one, which touches every aspect of life and proclaims a total commitment to a new idea and a new way of life as it swallows up the old and gives birth to the new. Cool. Next time I speak at an LDS baptism, I may be quoting a Jew. This is really well done. The water of the mikveh is designed to ritually cleanse a person from deeds of the past. The convert is considered by Jewish law to be like a newborn child. By spiritually cleansing the convert, the mikveh water prepares him or her to confront God, life, and people with a fresh spirit and new eyes. It washes away the past, leaving only the future. Of course, this does not deny that there were good and beautiful aspects of the past, but in the strictest religious sense, the past was only a prologue to future life as a Jew. How about that? There's a second layer of meaning to the mikveh. It marks the beginning of the ascent to an elevated religious state. The function of a mikveh goes beyond the basic purpose of purification. Anthropologists refer to this threshold, right at that moment in the mikvot, refer to this threshold of higher social status as liminality. This person at this moment of transition is liminal, or a threshold person. Okay? And when we talk about the children of the people of King Limhi, as they get ready to move to Zarahemla, we're going to find people in this liminal state. Okay? Entering adulthood from adolescence, for example, requires a tunnel of time, a rite of passage, a liminal state that acknowledges by symbolic acts the stark changes taking place in one's self-identity, behavior, and attitude. That's not bad, is it? That explains better this moment, and it gives you some continuity of, so now let's go back. What the world was John the Baptist doing? So you get this transitional liminal period where they are being admitted into a new covenant that they were making to a body of believers outside of the temple setting. That's a pretty important thing. And there would be certainly an amount of understanding among the people as they're streaming away from King Noah and they're landing in, and Alma's trying to teach them the moment that says, you want to do all this thing? Yes. Then what have you against being baptized? He probably said, what have you against being immersed in the mikvot? And they probably, yay, that's what we want. I mean, the clapping of hands, and they're just thrilled that they're going to be entering a new phase of their life. They would, if they were observant Jews, and certainly King Noah's people were clinging to the law of Moses, this is something that in all likelihood they understood. And they understood it went back to Sinai. Yeah?
Okay, just to be clear, so this was only done for converts to Judaism.
Yes.
Not every Jew, like we baptize everyone.
Right, right. So you get this sense of conversion. So now we go back and say, what was John the Baptist doing? There was a sense of conversion going on here. There is certainly a transition moment. Okay? And a conversion process that they would understand. Kind of cool, huh? All right. So like I say, next time I speak at a baptism, I'm probably going to use this quote here. I just think it's pretty true. All right. Yeah?
They also use the mikvah. Women do it before they're married.
Ah. Yeah, Marlowe's married to a Jewish lady, and so you get a chance to spend a fair time amount in the synagogue.
But women, before they're married, go to the mikvah to be washed totally.
In preparation for marriage and everything that goes there. Yeah. And see, I think depending on which branch of Judaism, they're probably using the mikveh in a certain way, but certainly the history of it, you can see how far back this goes. So, all right. One other point that I wanted to point to, because today we're going to talk about. We've got two groups of people sitting out there, and we've got King Limhi's people in bondage, and we've got Alma's people about to be in bondage. But Mormon is going to present them side by side with a lot of detail, and he means for us to compare them. That's why they're side by side. You study them in a dualistic thing. You put them together, and you can see the total picture by seeing both sides of it. It's like two phrases in a Hebrew poetry, where you've got this one and you've got this one, and it's the comparison that teaches you. Okay, well in this particular case, that's what we've got here. But I wanted to point out one other thing that I thought was, I was telling you how much I admire King Limhi, and you just get this quiet, powerful spirituality and very little written about him. But I want you to see something interesting here. If we go to Mosiah 7, let's see. I want you to, and this is really subtle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it just kind of leapt out at me. Remember when Ammon shows up and he brings all the people together and they're all talking, and he says, "Your witnesses this day," verse 21, "that Zeniff, who was made king over this people, he being overzealous," we're talking about overzealous, and again to say, "being deceived by the cunning and craftiness of King Laman, he yielded up his lands." At verse 22, all this he did for the sole purpose of bringing this people into subjection. Then he's going to say, "And behold, at this time we do pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites." There's some major history somewhere between that period of bondage for the sole purpose of bringing this people into subjection and bondage, and the next word, "and." There is a chunk of history right in between those two spots that he's leaving out. What part is he leaving out? Okay, who brought the people under bondage?
Themselves.
Zeniff, right?
With their
Zeniff is going to show up, and he's going to trust the Lamanites, and then they're going to see these Nephites as a nice source of income. So yeah, we'll bring you in, let you really build this thing up, and then we're going to conquer you, and now ultimately you end up in bondage. Okay? So that was under Zeniff. Now he's going to say, "And behold, at this time we pay a tribute to the king of the Lamanites, to a man of 1/2 of our corn." What happened between Zeniff getting snookered by King Laman and Limhi and his people paying bondage, are paying half of theirs to the king? Noah. His dad. And all the stuff. And all the wickedness. There's a whole period here, maybe a decade or so, or more, of wickedness and badness and everything going on, and then becoming, because under Zeniff they were pretty righteous. Limhi is pretty good. Noah is pretty stinky. And somewhere between, and look what he's doing. He leaves that entire thing out. If you were reading this and you didn't know anything about Noah, who would you believe is at fault for their bondage?
King Layman.
Zeniff right to Limhi.
Oh, okay, I see.
In Texas, we'd call this cowboying up. He's going to cowboy up. Rather, because he could have written this differently, couldn't he? Zeniff was overzealous, and he brought him in there, and the king deceived him, and he ended up in bondage. And my dad was really bad and awful, and that's why it is that we were then placed under bondage, because dad was really bad, and now I'm left having to pick up the crumbs, and yeah, we're in bondage, and it was my dad's fault. That's not what he's doing, is he? It's our fault. However we got here, Limhi's taking the blame, and he's not laying it on his dad. Now, he'll give you a bit of a hint, because he's going to say, he'll go down here and say 26, a prophet of the Lord they have slain. They, a chosen man who told them of their wickedness. That's as close as he gets to saying they did things and not necessarily us. But for the most part, what you're getting from Limhi is we can't blame anybody but ourselves for our own wickedness. And we're not going to try and dump it off anybody else. We're accountable for our choices.
That's pretty humble.
That's very humble. And I think it's very subtle, and he's not making a big deal out of it. But I'm really, really impressed with Limhi saying, Dad really messed up, but you know what? We're to blame. We're in our fix. And we're the ones that are paying tribute. And he's going to say, back here, 25, if this people had not fallen into transgression, the Lord would have not suffered this great evil to come upon them. And he's accepting the blame along with everybody else. That's like I say, it's really subtle, but I think it's very appropriate that he would do that. Does that make sense? Extreme humility. I'm in this fix and I can't dump it on anybody else.
And he was willing to, when Ammon and the brethren came, he was ready. And the people were ready to be baptized.
Yeah.
Because of his humility.
Yeah. Let's go there now, because now we're going to see even more. Because there's going to be that with a major dose of regret for these guys. So I wanted to put together these two, again, like Hebraic poetry, you got to see the two halves together to see the picture. Okay, so we'll use Hugh Nibley's The Doctrine of the Two Ways to do that. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on the stories. I'm going to assume most of us know a lot of these stories. Okay? But let's point out kind of the salient parts of this. So first of all, we have the people of Alma. And who are the people of Alma? Where had they gone? Yeah, these were the Alma's converts. And first of all, they're going to go to the waters of Mormon. And they're being immersed and cleansed. Okay? Now, at a certain point, they also realize something. Let's take about 3 steps back, because we need to keep this in mind. Remember that by history, the Nephites land in the original land of Nephi. Then Laman and Lemuel are being destructive, so then Nephi pulls out, and then they have another spot. And then they live there for hundreds of years. And then at a certain point, who then says, now, which prophet then says we need to leave? Mosiah. father of King Benjamin, says, it's no longer safe for us in the land of Nephi. And the Lord says, go. So then they travel from the land of Nephi to where? Zarahemla. At that moment, for those people in Nephi, under the direction of the Lord, where is their promised land? Zarahemla is their promised land. They are to go to their promised land led by the Lord. And they do. They travel through the wilderness. They will travel from Nephi. We think probably the highlands of Guatemala, kind of right in there. They come down onto the plain. They're down in Zarahemla. Now, why would anybody end up back in Nephi if Zarahemla is their promised land? They would have to be overzealous. It's good that we're in Zarahemla, but the really righteous people, the really gooder than the gooders, where are they?
Salt Lake.
Yes. Or Independence, Missouri. Or, in other words, yes, this is our promised land. The Lord has led us here, but there is a better place for the more righteous. Or a tent city out between St. George and Las Vegas. Okay? There's a better place for the real righteous, for the really good ones. For instance, for conference weekend, a lot of us are kind of sitting around in our jammies. And there's some people that come, their tradition is to come to the church and watch it and dress up in Sunday clothes and watch it in conference. And that's magnificent. That for them is the best way. That's where they feel the most power and everything. And when they're here, now it makes a difference if they're coming here and saying, well, the really good people are here wearing their Sunday best and the bad people are in their jammies. I've told the story before in my own little self-righteousness, where as a student up at then Rick's College on conference weekend, and I am and all my roommates are gone, and I get up in the morning and it's conference weekend, and I stumble out and I want to hear conference, and I went over and we had a stereo set up, and I'm fumbling with the radio on there, and I catch some scratchy little radio station that's broadcasting conference, and I can almost barely hear it. So I get down on the floor, and I'm laying on the floor next to one of the speakers listening to General Conference. And all the time I'm laying there on the floor all by myself listening to General Conference, I'm thinking, how righteous am I?
Uh-oh.
I'm in the wilds of Idaho. And I'm here and I can barely hear on this little scratchy radio station conference. Because I want to hear the gospel, and my roommates are gone, and I don't know, they're probably off sinning somewhere. But I'm here listening to conference, and I'm feeling so great about myself.
Uh-oh.
And then it gets to be halftime, and I'm hungry. And there is down in the lobby of our apartment complex a bunch of candy machines. So I figure I've got time while the Tabernacle Choir is singing to drag my little righteous self up, down the hall, get some candy bars so I can get back and crouch next to the radio station again. So I can hear the last words of prophets. And I walk into the lobby and everybody's sitting around watching KSL. On TV. and my whole pride factor goes. They're getting to watch it on TV, and I'm this poor, isolated kid in Idaho. And we have those moments where we're just righteous and righteous, and we kind of look down our nose at everybody else. Okay? And I think that Zeniff was doing some of that. I think he gets up there, he leaves, so now they're up there. So to them, the Lord said the promised land is Zarahemla, but we're going to be better than the better. We're going to be up there. And I think there is a moment for Alma and his people, and they're at the waters of Mormon, and now they know that King Noah's armies are coming out to get them, and they go, maybe the promised land really was Zarahemla. And when the Lord said it would be safer in Zarahemla than it was going to be in Nephi, maybe he knew what he was talking about. Somewhere in this process, we got to believe God knows what he's talking about. And when he tells his prophets, just follow it, dang it. But now Alma's going to get this sense, we got to get to our promised land. And in fact, we aren't in where we were supposed to be. We are in the wilderness, and we have to go home. We have to go home. How are we going to go home? Well, we got to start this journey towards our own promised land. Does that make sense? And in a sense, every one of us have to have that experience. And we should be walking out of conference yesterday going, it's time to get back to the promised land. There are things I need to change and work on and be different. I've drifted. I'm a bit in the wilderness here. And I need to get back to the promised land. And that's kind of where he's going with this. So the people of Alma, they gather, they're taught, they are baptized. Chapter 23, they're warned by the Lord, time to go, follow his instructions. So now they're going to travel before the armies of King Noah get them. Okay? Now, I think it's interesting that Alma, we're going to get this little detail. Alma himself, they want to make him the king. And we're going to get this little soliloquy. Let's pop over to 23 for just a second. Because part of what we're being told here is, and what a shock that this is coming right after our experience watching King Noah. Okay? Now we're going to have this little thing that Mormon's going to make sure this little speech from Alma gets dropped in here right after listening to King Noah. You think this is an accident? The people were desirous, verse 6, Alma should be their king, for he was beloved. And he said, it's expedient that we should, he said, it's not expedient we should have a king. You shall not esteem one flesh above another. And I say it's not expedient you should have a king. If it were possible you should have judgment of your kings, well, that would be really great. But 9, remember the iniquity of King Noah and his priests, and I myself was caught in a snare. Even I got snookered by this. Nevertheless, after much tribulation, the Lord did hear my cries, did answer my prayers. I do not glory. You've been oppressed. You've been delivered. 14, trust no one to be your teacher and minister except to be a man of God. And 16, now Alma, rather than being a king, was made high priest. So what would be the difference between being a king and a high priest? Who becomes kings generally? Political. Oftentimes the children of. Who becomes a high priest? Whoever the Lord calls.
Servant of God.
A servant of God. Mm-hmm. So it's who's going to be put in charge. So rather than being king, I will be high priest. Okay? All right. So Alma was made high priest, not a king. Now, we have a second group. This is the people of Limhi. How come the people of Limhi are the people of Limhi and not the people of Alma?
He's not there.
How come? How come they're the people of Limhi and not Alma? They didn't go. They didn't go. We don't know why they didn't go, but, they stayed when the people of Alma were leaving. For a variety of reasons, I'm sure. When the saints were streaming out of, they're about, in the general area around Nauvoo, there were somewhere really close to about 20,000 saints if you take all the spokes of the wheel. Joseph Smith was setting up settlements like spoke on a wheel with Nauvoo at its hub, and they're all over here. There's somewhere close to 20,000 total in that entire thing. Okay? How many went to Utah? 12,000. About 12,000.
12,000 out of how many did you say?
Over 20,000.
20. Oh my God.
So we have this vision of everybody in Nauvoo just in lockstep. They're off and they're gone. There were an awful lot that some went with Sidney Rigdon, some went with James Strange up to Wisconsin, some just hung around. Some were poor and couldn't afford to go right then, and so by necessity they stayed, and they were the ones that were driven out by the army, by the Battle of Mulholland that drove them across the river to the other side, and then sat on the other side of the river and watched their empty homes and ate the quail when they descended on all those stories. But again, there was a variety of reasons why people didn't all leave Nauvoo. There's a variety of reasons why the people of Limhi didn't go with Alma.
Weren't they Noahites and Limhiites that hadn't really been converted?
Sure, and a lot of them was they just thought, they saw this movement and you guys are idiots. Or, we are tight Deuteronomists and we believe in the law of Moses and we don't know what Alma's doing out there, but it's wrong. Stay close to the temple and live the law. That's where righteousness exists. And if he's teaching anything other than the law, we should kill him. I mean, there would be a variety of reasons why they stayed the people of Limhi.
Well, and when Alma left, Noah was in charge.
Yeah.
Not
And,
Limhi.
yeah. And at that moment, Noah's still there, and there's an oppressive king holding this thing together and a threat.
And Alma, when he started teaching privately. It says he taught privately. He could have first gone to one of his friends and then...
Yes. But why teaching privately?
Quiet.
Why?
Safety.
It's safety. There was so one of the things that happens here, even if you might think Alma's got a good idea, if you're a people of Limhi, this is a dangerous act. It's not lightly that Alma says to his people, are you willing to be there for one another and mourn with those that mourn, even unto death? We have committed what in the eyes of the king would be a treasonous act. We are no longer, if we're going to be baptized, if we're going to do a ritual cleansing, we are creating a new community that is outside of the law of Moses, of what these high priests in the temple are doing. We may be doing a treasonous act. So I think there were some that were scared of that retribution. There's a variety of reasons why they didn't go. But the reality is they didn't go. So the people of Limhi, they stay, they do not gather. Now, so back to Alma. How did they end up in bondage? They got out of town. They should be safe. People who are righteous should not end up in bondage. We're following the Lord's direction. Bondage is for them, it's not for us. In fact, we can tell who the righteous are. The righteous are not in bondage, and the wicked are in bondage. We're the righteous, we're not in bondage. Except we are. How did they end up in bondage? Who's putting them in bondage? The Lord's allowing it specifically. These people of Alma and their little wilderness setting now, the town of Elam. It's the priests of Noah. First of all, it's the Lamanites, right? The Lamanites trying to track down people. They're going to run across these guys. There they are. And then they're going to put the priests of Noah in charge of them. Now, if you're the Lamanites, you want the priests of Noah to take care of these guys because they're going to produce grain and stuff. They're a revenue-producing gang here. Be nice to them. Just keep an eye on them. For Amulon, the priest of Noah and the guy, this is Alma, the apostate, who got us kicked out of Dodge. And so for Amulon and the priests of Noah, this is about vengeance and revenge. And we're going to get our pound of flesh. Now, again, should this be happening to righteous people? We're supposed to be immune from this stuff. This happens to wicked people, where mean people are going to be saying mean things to us.
Well, the people of Alma had also been sinning for a while, so that creates a sort of bondage for them. So it comes around.
That's right. But in a sense, shouldn't the baptism and the covenanting and the promise say, we were in bondage, now we have been rescued, we have been saved? It's the Limhi people that are in bondage.
There's a refining that also, imagine the Lord is doing for this people.
There is a refining process that even comes for those that being cleansed of our bondage sometimes happens in a lot of ways.
It says, nevertheless, the Lord seeks to chasten his people
Yeah.
and try their patience and
And so we're going to see this in spades here, aren't we? So they're lifted by the Lord, and they submitted cheerfully. Now, I heard someone quoted this yesterday, I think. For the people of Alma, and we have these moments, what were they praying for? As these unrighteous, vengeful people were putting these really good people in bondage. What were they praying for? Deliverance. What did they get instead? Stronger backs. How often when we are stuck in a hard calling are we praying for deliverance? The bishop really needs to know how hard this is and finally release me. So how often in our prayers are we praying for deliverance? And instead, we should be praying for what?
Strength.
Stronger backs. Make me stronger to the load, not necessarily remove the load from me until the Lord seeth fit to remove it. Great lesson. And so now they have stronger backs. Okay? Now remember, who's putting the burden on them? Yeah, it is the king, it's the priest of King Noah, so we're getting all this vengeful, so we would have right to be, well, they're just being vindictive. They're just being mean. They don't know how good I am. One of the things that I've been playing with a little bit this last week is I've been looking at, because I work a lot and I've been thinking about doing some writing on the idea of working from forgiveness, or from grieving to forgiveness. And we start off with grief. We have to grieve an unfairness that's happened in our life. And we have to end up in a state of forgiveness where we're at peace. And we know we're at forgiveness when we're at peace. And the question is, what does the path look like going from this journey, because it's not a switch that gets flipped. What does it take to get me from grief and then carry this path over to forgiveness, where I'm at peace? And I've become more and more convinced that the path between grief and forgiveness is unrelenting, relentless, obsessive kindness. That we become more kind relentlessly in this journey to forgiveness. To anybody, anywhere we come in contact with, we be kind. I want you, just to give you an idea, I want you to picture for a second. You don't have to close your eyes, but you can just kind of picture for a second. I want you to picture that you're standing at the tree of life and you're enjoying the fruit. And you're looking over at the great and spacious building and you're hearing awful things being said to you from the great and spacious building. A lot of mocking. If you want an example of that, just go to the Salt Lake Tribune, read an article about the church, and then go to the comment section. Okay? And you just see, and so here comes all of these comments coming, mean comments from the great and spacious building, and you're standing there at the tree. Now, I want you to picture that as you're standing at the tree of life, that you reach in your pocket and you pull out your phone. And you call Domino's Pizza. And a few minutes later, I want you to see a Domino's Pizza guy show up at the bottom of the great and spacious building with a whole stack of pizzas. And he's walking into the building with all the pizzas, and pretty soon, a few minutes later, you see all the people in the great and spacious building standing there yelling things, but they're eating your pizza. Be kind to the people in the great and spacious building. Order them a pizza. Do nice thing even to do niceness and kindness to even the people that appear to be doing mean things. Now, does that mean that we become doormats and we allow people to abuse us and hurt us? No. We can kindly step away from situations. We can kindly maintain our boundaries so we're not being hurt. But our goal is to be unfailingly kind even to those people that have hurt us, especially in the past. And there's not an activity that is more focused on trying to become Christ-like than having to be nice to those that have been mean to us. And I think that's literally the pathway, because kindness has a companion word, and it's mercy. We have to provide kindness and mercy on our way to forgiveness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's not easy.
Oh, I don't think there's a tougher thing to ask. I really don't. I really don't. Okay? So, part of submitting cheerfully, burdens made light. I think that would even be being saying a kind word to even the overlords that are in the process of giving Alma and his people a hard time. Okay. So at the same time as this is happening, now let's go back to the people of Limhi. They fight and fight and fight so they don't get conquered. And then finally they're submitted because their people are being killed and they're being hurt. And finally they submit. Cheerfully? No. In fact, while Alma's people are submitting cheerfully, let's see, this is 21:13. Look at 13. And they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten, to be driven to and fro, and burdened according to the desires of their enemy. 14. They did humble themselves even to the depths of humility. They did cry mightily to God. Even all the day long did they cry to God that He would deliver them from their afflictions. And then look at 15. And when a people get to this stage, now the Lord was slow to hear their cries. As a people, generally. Because they were going through a process of cleansing. The Lord wanted to heal them and move them as quickly as possible, but they had to change. For whatever reason, they didn't join Alma. Okay? All right. So the Lord is slow to hear their cry. Now, I want you to see a stage that comes with them. So let's go back over to chapter 21, because this is... Okay. So now we're going to pick up the story. This is interesting that we have this story where Ammon and his people meet Limhi. And Mormon has at his disposal. Yes. He has two accounts of this event. He's got Ammon's account that we get in Mosiah 7. He actually has Limhi's account that now we get in 21 of the same event. So it's the only time I know in the Book of Mormon where we have the same event talked about twice from two different viewpoints. Kind of a cool moment. And there's an interesting element that is in Limhi's account that Mormon's going to copy from that is not in Ammon's account in Mosiah 7 because he wouldn't have known it. Why it is that they were so overjoyed to see Ammon and the brethren. Not just because it was these guys might be able to deliver them, but look at the one little detail element that is in King Limhi's record. And he says, nevertheless, after Limhi was in bondage and they're sent people off to get rescued, they send the people off and they find a land full of bones. Ammon talks about this. They found a land full of bones and records, and we brought back the records. Remember that one? Mm-hmm. Look at Limhi's version of this. Nevertheless, they did find a land which had been peopled, a land that had been covered with dry bones. Yea, a land which had been peopled and which had been destroyed, and they, having supposed it was the land of Zarahemla. They believed it was, the Jaredites, they believed until the moment that Ammon stood in front of them that Zarahemla had been wiped out. There was no promised land. There's no deliverance coming. Because Zarahemla has been destroyed and there's a land of bones out there and it is the land of our people that have been destroyed. Wow. So for Ammon to come walking in and he says, who are you? Well, I'm Ammon and I'm a descendant of Zarahemla. Wow. Where'd you come from? Zarahemla. No, they're all dead. No, they're not. They were living last time I was there.
40 days.
It's taken us a few weeks to get here, but here we are. You mean Zarahemla's still there? Yes! There is a promised land. Oh, that's pretty cool. That'd almost be like an atheist going, there is a God? There's possibilities. I thought it was all gone. Interesting little detail, and you'd have to go to Limhi's record to get this. They, having supposed it to be the land of Zarahemla, returned to the land of Nephi. Now, they brought a record, remember, and Limhi was again filled with joy and learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah, and there is a King Mosiah, and he lives in a city, and they're there. And by the way, he does have a means that he can translate. Now, Ammon, this I think is kind of important when we see what's going to happen. We'll talk about it next week. Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow that so many brethren had been slain. Ammon and his brethren were upset that King Noah and his priests had caused his people to commit so many sins. And Alma and his brethren were also sorrowful for the departure of Alma and the people who had formed a church of God through the strength and power of God and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. Ammon and his brethren were mourning that Alma has formed a church. People are being baptized. There's something happening here. Where's Alma? I don't know. He left. And Alma, and this might have been interesting for Limhi and his people to go, Ammon and his brethren are really mourning that they want to be with Alma. We want to be baptized too. Ammon's not been baptized, in most likelihood. We want to find Alma and join this church. Alma's forming a church that doesn't yet exist among the Nephites. They did mourn for their departure, for they knew not whither they had fled. Now they, Ammon and his brethren, would have gladly joined with them, for they themselves had entered into a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments. They'd already entered into the covenant, the King Benjamin covenant, and now what do we need? Baptism. We want to get it from Alma. Great, he's baptizing. Awesome. Where'd he go? We don't know. Oh. Now, interestingly enough, here comes the moment. Now since the coming of Ammon, King Limhi. had also entered into a covenant of God, and also many of his people to serve him and keep the commandments. And it came to pass that King Limhi and many of his people were desirous to be baptized. They were aware of the covenants. They were aware that baptisms were going on. And they did not go. For whatever reason, they didn't go. Now, maybe we could get it from Ammon. And it came to pass that King Limhi, where they were desirous to be baptized, that there were none in the land, and that included Ammon, that had the authority from God. Ammon declined. He's an unworthy servant. It says unworthy. I think it means he doesn't yet have the authority. Okay? Therefore, they at this time did not form themselves into a church, waiting on the Spirit of the Lord. They were desirous to become as Alma and brethren and flee into the wilderness. Okay? What have they got to do? They've got to get to the promised land where the church is now being organized. We've got to follow. We're in the wrong place. I think there are a lot of times with us that we have to recognize the promised land is somewhere over there. We're in the wrong place. We got to go. And you don't wait. The church is there. The commitments are there. The covenant people are there. We're in the wrong place. The traditions of our fathers have meant that we thought we were supposed to be here. But we're in the wrong place. We need to move. We need to go. And they are desirous to be baptized as a witness and testimony that they would be willing to serve God with all their hearts. So now, what are they going to have to do? Now look at this. So now their whole focus shifts. Now, 36. Now all the study of Ammon and his people and King Limhi and his people was to deliver themselves out of the hands of Lamanites and from bondage. So now we got to figure out how to get out of bondage. Okay? Familiar story? And so now here's where we get this. So now they're going to study to escape. How does Alma and his people get away? The guards get drugged, right? How?
A deep sleep.
They go into a deep sleep. Who did it for Alma and his people?
The Lord.
The Lord. Did Alma and his people have to study and spend a long time trying to figure out how to get out of bondage from underneath the Lamanites? That wasn't their focus. Their focus was to submit cheerfully. Until what? Until the Lord delivered them. By the way, guards are going to sleep tonight. Gather all your stuff together and we're out of here. Oh, nice. By the way, we think from the time that Alma leaves Nephi to the time he gets to Zarahemla is about 17 years. This is not 2 weeks in the wilderness. This is a long time. But by the way, they don't have to study for deliverance because they're studying what? The Lord. And we will just simply do what the Lord asks us to do. And when He says go, we'll go. Because that's what we've been doing. Limhi's people have to study because they're on their own. My guess is, had they really understood that we could really rely on the Lord more, I think the Lord would have loved to drug their guards. But they're busy, they're so busy studying, trying to figure out. Let's get Gideon in here. Gideon, you got any ideas? Okay, yeah, we can. We'll give them some really good wine, and they'll knock out. Really, is it strong enough? Yeah, we'll make it strong enough. Wow, that's really cool. Okay, we can do that. I don't think it occurred to them any more than it did to maybe the children of Israel standing in front of the Red Sea. Well, the Lord could do this. They're busy studying how to figure out how to do it. They didn't think, well, maybe the Lord, we wouldn't have to get out the wine. The Lord could just do it if we just trust Him. How many times in the Old Testament does the Lord say, let me fight your battles? You fight your battles because you think you have to do it. Let me fight your battles.
But aren't we also taught that we're supposed to do all that we can do and then rely on the Lord?
I think there are a lot of times that we do that, but I think sometimes we just, in the middle of all of that, we keep forgetting maybe the Lord has a better idea. There's an easier way for this to be done. And certainly this is that case. Okay, all right. So the guards are drugged, and they arrive in Zarahemla in 12 days. That is a direct route. By the way, it's one of the ways that we know, this is one of those moments where we know that the Book of Mormon did not take place across thousands of miles of continent. This is why we call it the limited Book of Mormon theory, because we have a 12-day period of a walk of a person between Zarahemla and from the land of the Nephites. It's about 12 days. It's about a 2-week walk. It's a couple of 100 miles. It's not a couple of thousand miles. It's a small space that all of this Book of Mormon story takes place within radius of a couple of 100 miles. Okay? This is one of the ways that we know. Now, back to Limhi. We're going to have to hustle here. We've got 8 minutes. Okay. So we get chapter 22. Gideon's idea, let's drug them. Okay, we're going to get all of our stuff together, and we're all getting ready to do this. And now, chapter 22. I need to see one other thing, and I think this is significant simply because space on the plates is limited, and for Mormon to put everything that goes onto these plates has a purpose and it has a meaning. Let me tell you the interpretation I put on this one. We drug the guards. They're going to sleep. Gather up your stuff, and we're on our way to Zarahemla. And look at 12. They had taken all their gold and silver and their precious things which they could carry. We don't have any indication of Alma and the people hauling off their gold and silver and precious things. When somebody is not yet baptized and they're on their way to join the church, what do they bring with them to the conversion process and to their baptism? Their baggage, their stuff, their traditions. The stuff that was gold and silver to them, they bring to the baptismal font. They bring to gospel essentials class. They bring to sacrament meeting. I think they bring their gold and silver and precious things. Because they have not yet learned they don't need them. Does that make sense? That's why I think this is kind of a cool concept that says for these guys, not yet baptized, in the process, they made a covenant, but they haven't changed yet. They're in the process of changing. They're on their way to the promised land. They're going to bring their gold and silver and precious things. Oh, and by the way, and also their provisions. Okay? All right. And then after many days in the wilderness, they arrive in the land of Zarahemla. Now, I know that it's many days because I went back and I looked. And when Ammon and the guys, who are their guides, Ammon and the guys are going to come out of Zarahemla. They're going to go up to Nephi and they're going to find them. Guess how long it takes them? About 40 days. They get lost in the wilderness. If you've ever been in that area, the rainforest down in that area, you can get lost in, 100 yards. So I get it. I understand that. Been there. So it takes them about 40 days. How long did it take Alma and the people? 12 days. These guys are taking this circuitous route because they've got Ammon, and it took them there. They still don't know how to get back to Zarahemla, and it's going to take them many days. Sometimes without the Spirit of the Lord, when we're doing it on our own, we're going to make the whole journey harder than it has to. And they're hauling around their gold and silver and precious things for 40 days in a rainforest. Don't do it on your own. Let the Lord tell you where to go. Dump the non-important stuff. Okay? All right. Make sense so far? Okay. I want to one last point, and then we'll be done. All right. And it is. Oh, you can't see that very well. No, it's okay. Okay. It's in Mosiah 24, and this kind of jumped out at me. And there's got to be. I'll probably. I love this idea enough that I'm just going to have to do it in Provo in August for Education Week because it's just such a wonderful concept. In Mosiah 24:20, I'm going backward just a little bit. Alma and his people departed into the wilderness, and when they had traveled all day, they pitched their tents in the valley, and they called the valley Alma, because he led their way in the wilderness. Yea, and in the valley of Alma they poured out their thanks to God, because he had been merciful unto them. They eased their burdens and delivered them out of bondage. Now, picture this for a second. They were in bondage. Are they yet in the promised land? No. They're on the way. They've left bondage, not yet in promised land. They're in the journey. And somewhere in that journey, they stop in the valley of Alma. And do what? Give thanks. Now, I believe with all my heart that so many of us, as we're in this process of we have maybe been in bondage, and maybe things are getting a little bit better, but we're not yet where we want to be. I think we have our Alma valleys. And in those Alma valleys, we're not yet where we want to be, but we're not where we were. Stop in the valley and give thanks in our Alma valleys. Take a moment to say, I'm not perfect yet, but I'm seeing progress, I'm seeing growth. I want to lose 25 pounds. I've lost 10. Stop in the Alma Valley and give thanks. I want to understand the Scriptures more. I had a moment this morning where I understood something a little better than I have. That's an Alma Valley. Stop and give thanks for those moments when we can see our movement. We can see that we're not quite in the bondage where we were. Recognize our traveling and our journeying and our progress in our journeys. Rather than saying, I can't, my kid is here, I can't be happy till he's on a mission. And he's 2. Therefore, I have to hold my breath and be nervous and be anxious, and I can't exhale until the day that I see him get on the plane and fly out of here. And that's not a guarantee either. But when you have little moments with your kids, it's like they're not where they're going to be. But you know what? We had a sweet little interchange for about 15 minutes. That's an Alma Valley. You're not the kind of teacher in your Sunday school class that you want to be. And oftentimes you struggle and you have a hard time and the kids don't seem to be listening. But this Sunday, for about 20 minutes, they were listening. That's an Alma Valley. We have a moment in our journey where we've moved and we can see some progress. Celebrate the progress in your Alma Valleys. Be nice to yourselves. We're not where we want to be, but we're on our way to the promised land. Step by step. I bury my testimony. These are two. If you take these stories together and you see it for what he's trying to teach us, and he gives you two sides of this, you get to see two people that make it to the promised land through two routes. One more straight, one more circuitous. Listen to the Lord and go where he tells you to go. Celebrate in your Alma Valleys and keep moving. And I leave that with you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.